Hello everybody. In this video we will talk about how to facilitate a training session in Incubator. And let me start with an illustration. So imagine two soccer teams that will face each other in a match in a couple of days. And both of them have a training session. And both of these teams practice corner kicks. They have a training session on corner kicks, very important to win the game. So team number one, the trainer comes in, he gathers the whole team in a room, and he tells them everything there is to know about corner kicks in 1.5 hours. This guy has read every book about corner kicks, he knows every footnote about corners, and you know what, he has actually written a book about shooting corners himself, so he's the guy, he's the expert in corners. And for 1.5 hours, he tells his team everything there is to know, and they're amazed by his knowledge. Like, there's so much to know, so much precision, so many details they didn't know. And then after he's done talking, he gathers them up for a Q&A, and they ask questions, and he wants to see if they have understood what he taught them. So team number two, the trainer gets his team together, and in 15 minutes, he gives them 3 key principles for shooting corners. And then he sends them off to the field and lets them practice for 20 minutes. And after 20 minutes, he gets them all together in the huddle and asks, okay, so what went well? What did not go well? How could we improve? What could we change? And all these players bring in their experience from just practicing. They bring in their ideas. They say, well, you know what? I could do this differently, and I could run like that and not go that way. And then somebody else comes in and say, well, that's a good idea, but we could change this and adapt this. And after this discussion, he sends them off to the field again, and they practice for another hour. So when the match comes, which team is better prepared to shoot corners? Which team has been made more competent by their trainers? And of course the answer is obvious. Like all of us would say instinctively, obviously, team number 2 has become way more competent in shooting corners, is way better prepared. We know it by heart, absolutely. But the funny thing is, or you could say the amazing or shocking thing is, that when we talk about training pastors or training church planters for ministry, very often what we encounter is training number 1. And we encounter trainers number 1. We get people in a room and we fill their heads with knowledge for 1.5 hours, or even longer, you know, if you think of the typical seminary day. We fill their heads with knowledge, but there's very little time for application, practice, debrief, discussion. So when we train you as trainers for Incubator, for City to City, we want to help you to become trainer number 2 instead of being trainer number 1. For training in Incubator, you don't have to be the person that is the expert on every single topic you will train. You don't have to be the person that has read every book about it and knows every footnote and is the expert. But we want to help you become a trainer that facilitates meaningful and relevant learning experiences for the people you train. So let's back this up with a little research. Different studies in adult education show that adults learn best when they immediately see that the content they are being trained in is relevant to them. Second, when they are engaged in their learning, and when they are asked to take responsibility for their learning. So the engaged learner learns a lot more and has a much more meaningful experience in learning. So let us use an analogy that we use in City to City training often to get this across, what we mean by that, how to engage the learner and how to create this meaningful learning experience. We use this analogy of a 2-rail fence. So think about a fence that, you know, very often goes around farms or something with 2 rails. So you have your fence, you know, often they go on for a kilometer and a kilometer. You have 2 rails and you have your posts. And this is an analogy we use for meaningful learning. So what do we mean? So the first rail, the first thing your learners need, the people in your Incubator cadre need, is content, is principles, is teaching, the principles they are to work with. So this is principles, content, input, teaching, whatever you want to name it. And the second rail is application, practice. Application and practice. And of course, if you think about training of pastors, very often the focus is heavily on here, on teaching, content, truth, theology, and so on. And the focus is very, very little on application and practice. In other traditions you may have encountered, the focus is more here, more on, application, getting out there, doing it. Theology or the rational, not that important. But we think we need both. And we need something else, these are the posts, that ties both together. And this is what we call a dynamic reflection. Dynamic reflection. And this is where the magic happens, basically. So let me come back to the soccer team and explain what we mean. The second soccer team, they needed some principles, they needed some input, some tactics on how to do the corner well. These are the key principles you need to apply. Here's the input, here's the teaching, here's the content. They needed that in order to be better, to become more competent. But then they also needed the application and practice. They take the theory and put it into practice, put it into application. But then, very important, and what we easily miss, is this dynamic reflection. And this is the coach gets them back together and asks, so what went well? What did not go well? How did you apply the theory? What could we change? And this is where the aha moments happen. This is where the players realize, oh, this is what you meant. Oh, now I get it because I've tried it and I failed, or it worked well this one time. Why did it work that time and not that time? So this is where meaningful learning happens. So how do we apply this? Engaging the learner through content, application, and dynamic reflection. How can we apply this to the training of church planters? And let me give you a practical example of a session I've taught. I've taught a session on gospel theology once. And the major content point I wanted to bring across was the gospel as a third way. So the gospel is neither relativism, nor moralism, nor some weird, crazy mixture of both, but it's a third way, it's something else entirely. So that was the point of the training session. So how did I set it up?